Once upon a time, in a small town hidden on the edge of a dense forbidden forest, there was a camping that had a reputation that scared to the core of everyone who heard his name. It was known as the Wendigo Forest. Local legends warned of an evil creature that lurked in these dark trees, a creature known as the Wendigo. For a long time, the townspeople avoided entering these cursed forests, but, as in all horror stories, curiosity often prevails over courage. A group of 5 friends, Emily, David, Sarah, Mark and Lisa, decided to ignore the warnings and explore the infamous campsite on their own. They craved adventure and thought that the tales of the Wendigo were nothing more than simple superstitions. Armed with camping gear and youthful enthusiasm, they set off. The path leading to the Wendigo Forest was narrow and winding. It seemed to get darker and more treacherous with every step they took. The trees towered over our heads, their branches scratching the sky like the fingers of a skeleton. After dark, the friends pitched their tents in a clearing deep in the forest. The atmosphere was heavy, and there was an unspoken tension between them. A strange feeling that they were being watched permeated the air, but they brushed it off, attributing it to their wild imagination. As the night grew colder, they huddled together by the crackling fire, telling each other ghost stories. Their laughter echoed through the silent forest, breaking the strange stillness. Unbeknownst to them, their joy has awakened something ancient and sinister. An icy wind whistled through the trees, bringing with it a sense of discomfort. The shadows danced menacingly, as if mocking their audacity to invade the sacred land. And then a low, guttural growl echoed through the forest, causing them to freeze in place. The heartbeat accelerated, and the air thickened with terror. In the distance, they saw glittering eyes, a wild, hungry gaze fixed on them. Panic gripped their hearts as the creature materialized from the depths of darkness. Imposing and emaciated, she possessed a skeletal skeleton covered in torn and decaying flesh. The Wendigo, a creature driven by insatiable hunger and an insidious desire to eat human flesh, stood in front of them, its mouth filled with jagged, yellowed teeth. Its stench was unbearable, the smell of rot and rottenness permeated the air. Paralyzed with horror, the friends watched as the Wendigo circled over their camp, his outstretched limbs moving with artificial grace. His eyes never left them, the hunger in them flickered like fire. With each turn around the fire, the creature became bolder, getting closer to its prey. Despair seized the group and they scattered, their minds clouded by primitive survival instincts. Branches snapped under their feet as they ran through the night, branches scratched their clothes. The forest seemed to come alive, conspiring against them, as if conspiring against their escape. One by one, the friends succumbed to the relentless pursuit of the Wendigo. David's alarmed screams tore through the darkness, followed by Sarah's frightened screams. Emily and Mark, out of breath and on the verge of exhaustion, realized that they were the last survivors. When they came across a dilapidated hut, hope flared up in their hearts. Despair outweighed their fear, and they sought refuge in its crumbling walls. The menacing presence of the Wendigo persisted, its eerie growl sounded all night, its unwavering determination. Inside the cabin, time seemed to have stopped. The walls whispered ancient secrets, and the air itself was tainted by the darkness permeating the forest. Emily and Mark clung to each other, clasping each other's trembling hands, the weight of their fallen friends pressing down on their souls. As night fell, Emily and Mark heard the haunting sound of the Wendigo scratching the cabin walls, its sharp claws leaving deep notches in the wood. Their fear reached a climax when the door shuddered under the weight of the creature's blows. With every passing moment, their hopes were fading. It seemed inevitable that the Wendigos would infiltrate their sanctuary by committing suicide. In a final act of desperation, they retreated to the basement of the hut, hoping to find a little respite. The basement was a maze of darkness, filled with musty air and a suffocating smell of rot. In the depths of this desolate place, they found the remains of previous victims, clean skeletons, evidence of the insatiable hunger of the Wendigo. Knowing that their fate was sealed, Emily and Mark held on tightly to each other, whispering the last words of farewell. But when the monstrous figure of the Wendigo loomed at the top of the stairs to the basement, his eyes burned with insatiable hunger, an unexpected glimmer of light pierced the darkness. A group of hunters, attracted by the commotion caused by the presence of the Wendigo, burst into the hut, armed with shotguns and torches. The creature let out an eerie howl as the hunters opened fire, their bullets finding their mark. The Wendigo writhed in agony before retreating into the forest and disappearing into the night. Emily and Mark were the only survivors of this terrible encounter. They emerged from the Wendigo forests, forever tainted by the horrors they had witnessed. They no longer regarded fairy tales as mere superstition. They carried the weight of the Wendigo curse, a constant reminder of the horrors they faced. And so the legend of the Wendigo Forest continued to haunt the city, a frightening reminder that some fairy tales are born not from imagination, but from the darkness that dwells in the deepest corners of the human.
It was a cool autumn afternoon when a group of adventurous friends led by Jake decided to go hiking in the wilderness. About the place they chose, the locals whispered in a low voice, a sinister place known as the Cannibal Refuge. Nestled deep in a dense forest, the refuge had a history shrouded in darkness, stories of cannibalism and wickedness. Despite the sinister rumors, the group was determined to test their mettle. They were armed with tents, hiking equipment, and experienced a mixture of excitement and nervousness that occurred when they plunged into the unknown. The journey began, and as they explored the wilderness, the surrounding nature seemed to become strangely calm. Night fell as the group reached their destination, a clearing surrounded by 100-year-old trees, their silhouettes illuminated in a bewitching way by the full moon. They camped out, trying to get rid of the feeling of being watched. But Jake, an eternal skeptic, dismissed their anxiety as simple paranoia. Gathered around a glittering campfire, they shared stories of local legends. Each story is more chilling than the previous one, from which they get goosebumps down their backs. However, a sudden rustling in the bushes interrupted their conversation, making them suspicious. "Don't worry, guys. It's probably just a wild animal," Jake said, trying to comfort his friends while glancing furtively in the direction of the forest. Despite Jake's assurances, the unsettling atmosphere persisted. Every twig of a branch and every owl felt like the breath of an invisible creature. As night approached, the warmth of the campfire did not bring much comfort to the penetrating cold that seemed to come from the surrounding forest. When midnight arrived, the group reluctantly decided to disperse to their tents. However, falling asleep was not so easy, because they were disturbed by strange sounds outside their shelters. The scratches on the tent fabric, the silent whispers, and even the feeling of being watched engulfed their troubled minds. The next morning, they exchanged unsleeping glances, each feeling the weight of an unspoken fear. Determined to move forward, they planned to venture deeper into the forest to explore the rumored cannibal refuge. As they got deeper, the atmosphere became oppressive. The foliage was getting thicker and the trail was getting darker and darker. The sound of water flowing through the trees led them to the entrance of a secret cave. Undecided but curious, they entered the dark recesses of the cave. With flashlights in their hands, the group advanced cautiously, rays of light casting terrible shadows on the walls. Inside, they discovered disturbing signs and remnants of primitive rituals. It became clear that this cave had a disturbing past. Continuing their exploration, they came across a frightening sight: human bones scattered on the floor of the cave, testifying to the sinister reputation of the shelter. The fear of the group intensified and the desire to flee became stronger every moment. But when they turned around to leave, a frosty surprise awaited them. The entrance to the cave was now blocked by a huge rock that sealed them inside. Panic spread through their veins, and they desperately tried to move the rock, but to no avail. They are trapped, cut off from the outside world. They realized that they were not alone in the cave. The shadows seemed to wriggle and dance with sinister jubilation. As the hours turned into days, the group's determination weakened. Hunger tormented their stomachs, and their tongues were dried up by thirst. The oppressive aura of the cave seemed to penetrate into their souls, driving them crazy. On the verge of madness, the whispers echoed in their heads, and they could swear that they had heard laughter, cruel and mocking. One after another, the members of the group found themselves in terrible circumstances. Exhausted, weak, and persecuted by their darkest fears, they became easy prey to an evil creature who declared the cave as their property. Their bones joined countless others scattered throughout the cave, locked forever in a cannibal refuge. Years later, tourists came across the remains of the camp, unaware of the horrors that were unfolding deep in the forest. The legend of the cannibal lair would continue to live on, becoming a cautionary tale for those who dared to walk the path of darkness in nature.
Once upon a time, in the depths of a secluded forest, there was a camping place known as Midnight Lake. The calm waters of the lake shimmered in the moonlight, beckoning enterprising souls seeking solace in the embrace of nature. However, locals whispered an ancient curse enveloping the lake, warning visitors about the unspeakable horrors hiding under its quiet facade. It is believed that the history of the curse of Midnight Lake goes back to the past, at a time when a small secluded village flourished nearby. The villagers lived harmoniously, relying on the rich resources that the lake provides. But their prosperity gave rise to arrogance, and they began to neglect the sacred nature of water, viewing it as nothing more than convenience. One fateful night, when the villagers gathered to celebrate a bountiful harvest, an elderly woman known as Alara approached them with a serious warning. She was known for her connection with the spiritual realm, and her prophetic visions were revered by everyone. Pale and trembling, Alara begged the villagers to respect the sanctity of the Midnight Lake and the spirits living in its depths. His pleas found no response, drowned out by the hoarse laughter and drunken merriment of the villagers. Ignoring the words of the wise woman, they continued their feast, ignoring the darkness that would soon fall upon them. As the night grew darker, a storm broke out in the village, causing a torrential downpour, from which the water in the lake rose. The once calm surface was violently spinning, turning into a boiling cauldron of anger. Thunder rumbled, lightning flashed across the sky, and a powerful curse was invoked from the depths of the Midnight Lake. From now on, anyone who dares to approach the cursed lake will be subjected to the wrath of vengeful spirits. Stories of disappearances, unexplained accidents, and heartbreaking encounters haunted the area. The village that once flourished during his lifetime has turned into ruins, abandoned by those who survived the wrath of the curse. News of the cursed lake spread around the world, reaching the ears of a group of friends looking for thrills: Sarah, an avid adventurer; Mark, an experienced outdoor enthusiast; Jessica, a resourceful and determined young woman; and David, a skeptic eager to prove that the people living on the cursed lake are real thrill seekers. The legends are wrong. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and bravado, the four decided to challenge the curse of Midnight Lake. They packed their camping gear, armed themselves with pocket flashlights and set off on a journey into the heart of the forbidden forest. Their trek took them through winding paths and dense foliage, and the oppressive silence compounded their growing anxiety. The air was thick, charged with otherworldly energy. At dusk they reached the edge of the Midnight Lake, the waters of which shimmered strangely in the fading light. Sarah, still the leader of the group, rallied her friends, urging them to move forward despite the unrestrained sense of foreboding. They pitched their tents on the shore, anxiously exchanging glances, seeking solace in large numbers. Darkness descended, enveloping the camp in an impenetrable veil. Strung up to the limit, the friends gathered around the crackling fire, its faint glow serving as a fragile barrier against the impending darkness. Shadows danced anxiously around them, whispering secrets of past horrors. Sarah was telling the legend of the curse in a trembling voice, her words hanging heavy in the night air. As night fell, an alarming chill penetrated their bones, and distant echoes of gloomy cries echoed throughout the lake. The group held on to each other, their hearts beating in unison, their fear mixed with the sounds of a haunted night. In the darkest hours before dawn, Sarah, driven by an insatiable desire to get answers, went alone to the shore of the lake. She stood at the water's edge with a beating heart and called upon the spirits that dwell in the cursed depths. "Show yourself," she screamed, a mixture of defiance and terror in her voice. "Deliver us from this curse." At that moment, the surface of the lake split, destroying the illusion of serenity. A thick mist rolled across the water, swirling and swaying, exposing the twisted figures of ghostly figures emerging from the depths. Their gloomy lamentations echoed through the forest, making Sarah shudder. As the ghosts materialized, Sarah could see the anxiety etched on their ghostly faces. The tortured souls of the villagers, forever stuck between the worlds of the living and the dead, were doomed to relive their last moments in eternity. Suddenly, the spirits turned their attention to Sarah, their empty eyes staring at her trembling figure. Their voices blended into an otherworldly chorus, begging him to heed their warning and flee before it was too late. In a panic, Sarah backed away, her feet tangled in the undergrowth. She sighed heavily, her mind reeling under the weight of the reality of the curse. She ran to the campsite, her friends were waiting for her, concern was written on their faces. "Pack your things," she was crying, her voice was insane. "We have to leave now. Curse, it's real. Not doubting their urgency, the group hastily set up their camp and disappeared into the night, their footsteps echoing through the haunted forest. The spirits followed them, their gloomy cries getting louder and louder with each step they took. At dawn, the friends came out of the forest, their faces were pale, and their hearts were heavy. They vowed never to return to the cursed lake, which is forever haunted by ghosts hiding under the calm waters of Midnight Lake. Years later, rumors about the curse of Midnight Lake are still spreading in nearby cities, and this instructive story is passed down from generation to generation. Adventurers and thrill seekers are warned about cursed waters, spirits doomed to wander at night, making sure that Midnight Lake remains an eternal testimony to the power of ancient curses.
Long ago, in the heart of an isolated forest, there was a place known as the Haunted Wooded Refuge. It was a tent camp unlike any other, with a dark and frightening reputation, from which goosebumps ran down the backs of even the bravest souls. The forest that surrounded the refuge was dense and sinister, its tall trees casting long, frightening shadows that seemed to whisper secrets to the wind. Local legends told of strange incidents and unexplained disappearances, warning everyone who was willing to listen to stay away. But there were always those who could not resist the charm of the unknown. One summer, a group of 5 friends, Emma, Jake, Sarah, Alex and Ben, treated themselves to a weekend camping trip in the haunted forest. They mocked these stories, dismissing them as mere made-up stories to scare the faint of heart. Full of curiosity and anticipation for the adventure, they gathered their camping equipment and hit the road. As they plunged into the forest, the atmosphere became heavier and heavier and a feeling of embarrassment invaded them. The once vivid sounds of the wild nature subsided, replaced by a frightening silence that seemed to penetrate into their souls. The sun began to set, painting the sky in crimson and golden tones when they finally arrived at the camp. The shelter looked abandoned, with shabby tents, overgrown grass and fallen branches scattered all over the territory. The campfire pit served as a solemn reminder of past campfires that had gone out long ago. Despite the spooky atmosphere, the group laughed nervously, deciding to make the most of their ill-fated adventure. When night fell and darkness enveloped the forest, they gathered around a crackling fire, seeking comfort in its warmth. They shared stories and laughed, trying to muffle the ominous murmur that seemed to pass through the trees. But their attempts at bravery failed to contain their sense of fear. Suddenly, a bone-penetrating wind passed through the camp, extinguishing the fire in an instant. The forest is plunged into total darkness, except for the dim light of their lanterns. They were seized with panic, their hearts beating in sync with the distant fight of the drums of the forest. Then the sound echoed in the night, an unearthly and painful howl that pierces the silence. The group collapsed, their eyes wide with horror as they stared into the surrounding darkness. The shadows danced on the outskirts of their view, the trees seemed to twist unnaturally. Sensing the approach of someone's presence, they sought refuge in their tents. But the impending horror would not be so easy to suppress. A strange murmur filled the air, disembodied voices whispered their deepest fears and secrets, sending cold shivers down their backs. One by one, the inhabitants of the camp began to disappear. Emma disappeared without a trace, her tent remained empty and abandoned. Jake, paralyzed by fear, was found in the morning, with an expression of horror frozen on his face. Sarah, pushed to the brink of madness, wandered blindly into the forest, and no one ever saw her. There was only Alex and Ben left, their courage was at the limit. Determined to survive, they were feverishly looking for a way out, emotionally navigating the labyrinth of the forest. But the ghost seemed to be playing with their minds, distorting their perception and making them go in circles. The days turned into eternity as they tried to be saved. Deprived of sleep and on the verge of collapse, they came across a dilapidated hut hidden deep in the forest. Despair clouded their minds as they sought refuge within its crumbling walls. Inside the hut, they discovered old diaries and shabby photos, remnants of a dark past. The pages told stories about disturbed rituals, about the appeal of forces beyond human understanding. The photos showed faces distorted by despair, locked forever in a kingdom between life and death. The anger of the forest was getting stronger and stronger, seeping into the hut, breathing life into the ghosts of the desert that roamed its corridors. Exhausted souls wandered in the shadows, muttering curses and begging for release. Alex and Ben realize that they are entangled in a web of lost souls doomed to suffer with them. Every moment the persecution intensified, bringing them to the brink of madness. But in the midst of this chaos, they stumbled upon a clue, a mysterious passage in a diary that hinted at a purification ritual. hope broke out in them as they gathered the necessary ingredients and performed the ancient rite. The ritual caused a storm of ghostly rage, a cataclysm of light and darkness that swept through the hut. The exhausted souls, freed from their eternal prison, dissolved in the night, their painful cries echoing one last time in the forest. When dawn broke, Alex and Ben came out of the hut. Their bodies and souls were mutilated forever by the horrors experienced. They came across a rescue team. Their arrival was a coincidence or maybe something more. The refuge of the haunted forest will forever remain a monument of their painful ordeal, a place where darkness and the ethereal crossed paths. Rumors about the tragic fate of the group circulated in the surrounding towns, forever capturing a haunted wooded refuge in local folklore. Those who heard these stories felt inexplicable urges, the desire to face their own fears and explore the depths of the unknown. But whether they meet salvation or the same haunting fate, only